Welcome everyone to another session of the Product Management View webinar series. Every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, product management professionals can pick up the latest in thought leadership, tips, and tricks. James Robertson has been with Smalltalk since 1993. When Syncom took over Visual Works, he came along as a sales engineer. He is now in product management. Prior to this, he was with Booz Allen, where he was on a training contract with Park Place. He now hosts, among other things, the Smalltalk blog and podcasts. Take it away, James.
My name is James Robertson. I am the product manager for the Syncom Smalltalk product line. For those of you who don't know what that means, what the product means, that is, Smalltalk is a software development language, dates back to 1980, or really into the late 70s, and it competes with things like Java and C#. So just to give you an idea of what it is that I represent, and what I'm going to be talking about really is how I respond to things that I find out on the internet that are being said about my product, about my company, and responding to positive and negative things that happen. So along those veins, let's go to the agenda. First question that might come up is, why do you care? You know, the theory that a lot of people might have is, well, that's what I have PR and marketing people for, is to respond to these kinds of problems. To which really my base response, and I'll get to this in a few examples, is that this is too important to leave to the PR and marketing professionals, that at least in an awful lot of cases, and I'll have examples of this, if you leave this to them, they will not respond fast enough, and you'll take some damage and some hits, and you'll also miss some opportunities. I'm going to also address how I get my message out, which may be appropriate to how you could get your message out depending on what industry you're in and what product you're trying to promote. And then I'll talk a little bit about how I respond both to criticism and praise that I stumble across, and more importantly, how I find that that's happened in the first place. So, along the lines of the first one, why you should care, I have three examples here, the first one being kryptonite locks. A couple of years ago, this is in 2004 now, somebody posted through, I think it was either Engadget or Gizmodo, don't recall which, I think it was Engadget, that you could pick a kryptonite lock with a Bic pen. And actually they responded to this faster than they get credit for. I think it was like 5 days before they posted something, and then it was a few weeks later that they had a plan out for replacing those locks. The difficulty is that worked fine 10 years ago, but at this point, you can have a complete blog storm raging about your product within a few hours or days at worst on the web. So responding in 5 days just wasn't fast enough. So the PR people are not entirely used to the notion that they're going to get buried in criticism that fast. And this is an example of why you really need to get out in front of problems quickly, because even something that's a small problem can turn into a much larger looking problem than it really is. I mean, Kryptonite responded to this relatively well. They had information out quickly, 5 days. They had a fix out within weeks. But within that relatively fast time period, they took an awful lot of damage on the blogosphere. And if you Google for Kryptonite locks at this point, you will still find an awful lot of negative stories. So they just did not get out in front of this fast enough to deal with the way things move now. And another example of that, I go to the next slide here, is what people call Dell hell. And this actually is something that came upon Dell slowly through time. They were trying to shave pennies over time, the way a lot of people are in their support organization. So you would buy a Dell, and it's a relatively cheap machine. That's the end of the market they're playing in. That's fine. And they were trying to keep costs down by keeping the support inexpensive. They were outsourcing a lot of it to India, which in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. The difficulty is, over time, more and more people were having issues with that support, and eventually someone with a relatively big microphone, Jeff Jarvis, who's a former journalist, made a rather large post on the internet, and I have the URL right there on the screen, about the problems he was having with Dell. That got picked up and amplified, and then because his post got found by so many people, including mainstream media sources, all of the other complaints started to get noticed. So suddenly, a problem which had been building slowly over time, and in all likelihood wasn't being noticed by anybody at Dell other than a few people well down in the organization, got noticed all the way up to the executive suite, and they weren't entirely certain what to do about this. And it took them quite a while to deal with it. They've since then, from what I've been reading, improved their support organization.